and welcome to Season 1 of the new series Teaching Matters on the PsychSessions Network. This series is co-hosted by Dr. Rob McEntarffer, who serves as an assessment specialist for the Lincoln Public School System in Lincoln, Nebraska, and me, Eric Landrum, your humble podcast servant from Boise State University and co-founder of PsychSessions. Rob and I, we had a blast recording these chats, 12 episodes in all in Season 1, including this brief introductory episode. Episodes 2 through 12 range in length from 16 minutes to 35 minutes each. So they are meant to be bite-sized, suitable for binge listening if you wish. Oh, we ramble quite a bit, and at times you might laugh with us or laugh at us. Honestly, we don't care which. Please know that the viewpoints expressed here represent Rob and Eric's own opinions respectively, and not the opinions of their individual employers. As we discuss teaching matters, we hope these conversations will be provocative and thought-provoking. If you have ideas for future episode topics or want to comment, most podcast outlets allow for comments, or you can email us at psychsessionspodcast@gmail.com. Now, I will put that email address in the liner notes for each episode, show notes, but here it is again, all one word, psychsessionspodcast@gmail.com. Thank you so much for listening, and enjoy Season 1 of Teaching Matters. I think you mapped out, or we mapped out, maybe first segment, talk a little bit about origin, our paired origin story. I think it'd be good to talk a little bit about what you do.
Sure.
Because I think in the high schools, you have a fairly unique position, I think.
Sure.
And then I don't know what, I guess I think about it in two segments, two 20 to 25 minute chats, whatever you want for the second segment. You are, I'm trying to think of the right word. When we get into this later on, I would love for us to have a little mini series or a little mini tangent on single item diagnostic testing.
Oh, sure.
Or assessment. That's probably too early to launch that now. Somewhere down the road, that'd be fun.
Yeah, maybe I'll look through. I just don't know many people who started a journal that I'm really interested in the research that publishes. And you're my one friend who's done that. So I was thinking of capitalizing on that connection.
And of course you can, but the thing is, I've read so many of those articles, I won't remember the details of many of them specifically.
Yeah, I know. I would have to study too. So we'd have to pick one and then study up, and then maybe that's too much for these conversations. I don't know.
Well, I mean, but I would say that these conversations can be anything that we want them to be. If we were going to talk about specific studies, I'd almost want to have it in front of me.
Me
so
too.
I wouldn't get the details wrong.
Yeah, no, I would have to study it, and I would probably have it in front of me while we were talking.
Yeah, and or we could talk about the studies we wish they were out there.
That'd be cool.
And then maybe as a challenge to the listeners, if we don't know the literature as well as we think we do, send us the citation to the study we think's not out there, but maybe you know that's out there, or maybe you already did. And cool. We will publicize it on a later episode.
That'd be really fun.
That'd be funny. It's almost, I don't think we could use this, but got stumped the chump or something like that. Let's play the old man game. Here's what we need in the literature. We need a study that looks at, there is one, dude. It was done in 1972 by Bill McKeechee.
It's the same flavor of stump the chump, but maybe slightly differently. If anybody wondered what somebody involved in K-12 education and somebody involved in higher education thinks of this finding, we might be in a unique position to talk about that. Might be because we come from different perspectives, and not everybody has the perspective of either K-12 or higher ed.
Yeah.
And then specifically for you, you're so passionate about teaching in higher ed, and so that makes you unique. That gives you a perspective in higher education that might be unique and valuable as well.
We could talk about the inability of learning styles to die.
Yes, that'd be great. A whole education myths thing, the education myths that we wish would die. That'd be cool.
Oh, educational mythbusters. We could do.
I would love educational mythbusters. That'd be fun.
We only use 10% of our brains.
We only hear depending on which bad graphic you read, we only remember 5% of what we read, 10% of what we hear, 15% of what we, I don't know, stick up our nose.
We only, what is it? Oh, where was I going? I had one.
Yeah.
Shoot. What was it?
While you're thinking,
Yeah, go for it.
I read a good book. I thought it was a really good book chapter about why teacher-centered and student-centered aren't opposites.
Yes, I would agree with that. And I think without definitions, those terms can be deceiving.
Yeah. There's another definitional one that's running around K-12, but I don't know if it's running around higher ed. Project-based learning versus explicit instruction. Or sometimes it's called discovery learning versus teacher-centered instruction, or inquiry learning versus direct instruction. And it's just a huge definitional muddle.
Yeah, and versus is part of the muddle because they're not contrary approaches. It's not one or the other. They're not versus one another.
Yeah.
I don't think there's a teacher on the planet that does project-based or inquiry-based instruction that doesn't also do direct instruction.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, it would be really bizarre and probably frustrating if you tried.
It's not an either or. It rarely is.
So maybe I think this idea is appealing to both of us. Education myth busting, that part of that sounds a little egomaniacal, like we could have the final word, but I bet what we do is we would just explore the hell out of it and help clarify definitions and clarify what the issues are.
Yeah, it's almost, it's probably not myth busting, but maybe they're educational misnomers.
Something, yeah.
Or misunderstandings.
Yeah.
We're not like the myth busters that were on TV. The misnomer that you can't do anything with a bachelor's degree in psychology.
That would be a great one.
That conversation is really nuanced and complicated, and the opposite is actually true. But it takes a while to get people to understand it, and it's so complicated that it doesn't fit well on a coffee cup or a t-shirt.
I like, and related to IPI, another one that I'd like to do, I'm glad this is being recorded because we have a bunch of episodes already. Exploring the relationship between skills and content knowledge.
Oh my goodness. We might invite some guests to join us for those, because I am very guilty of simplifying that and pitting them against one another. And for me, and it's not a perfect analogy, content is the gas in the tank. Yeah. We can't do anything without content. And as teachers of psychology, we love our content. We worship our content. We fight over, I need more time for cognitive, no developmental, no social rules, or whatever your area that you love. And if you can't apply it, if you can't use it, remember it, recall it, apply it properly. If you don't have that skill, if you can't apply it to your daily life, memorization and regurgitation is probably at best a sophisticated magic trick.
Interesting. Ooh, this will be great. I think I agree with that. And not in opposition, not dichotomy. And if you can't do something with knowledge that you supposedly have, do you actually have that knowledge? Like, it's a level of, the word knowledge, I think, could be unpacked. You're right. I think that there's a level that's just memorization, just recognition, maybe. I can put my finger on it that I've seen it before. But I don't think that's usually what people actually mean when they use the word knowledge. I think they probably also mean being able to use it, which implies a connection to a skill.
And I actually think we're now recording our episode. This is called Live Planning for the Future. And I try really hard not to criticize my colleagues who still use multiple choice testing, because there are reasons to use it. But you have to realize that what you're doing is that you're testing a student's ability to recall information on a singular day.
Yeah.
That's what a test score will give you if a test is constructed well.
Yeah.
And that's it. Oh, I remember my myth from before. Yeah. The myth that Maslow's hierarchy of needs is real.
Yeah. Yeah.
That those steps are really there, and the hierarchy is actually built in, and one is more than the other, and self-actualization really exists.
We could do a whole series on the pyramids. Another one that I definitely wouldn't say is a myth, but I would love to do some more reading about Bloom's taxonomy that gets presented as a pyramid. And I've read a couple things that imply that Bloom would have hated that.
My understanding is that most of us, I'm going to be really careful with language here. Most of us almost always oversimplify the original 1956 Bloom's taxonomy, as there were 3 domains, not just the cognitive domain. There were cognitive, affective, and social, and we only talk about the 6 levels of the cognitive domain.
Wow.
And I believe it, I'm not going to say it properly, Cradiville and Anderson revision in 1990s.
Seen that.
Revised the cognitive at the top. It's no longer, what was it? It was evaluation, and it became creativity, which made sense. There's some reordering, I think, up there at the top, and they make intuitive sense. But here's another myth that makes intuitive sense. Kubler-Ross's 5 stages of death and dying.
You bet.
They connect, they make intuitive sense, but I'm not so sure there's a lot of data that supports that there are 5 independent stages of death and dying. Although it makes for a good story, and it's very comforting to think about bargaining, denial, acceptance, anger, and I always forget one of the 5.
One of them. Forgetfulness. I think that's a stage.
Yeah, that probably is one of the stages. Forgetfulness. All of these lovely things that we enjoy teaching. That they're not apocryphal. I don't want to go that far, but they're loose at times.
My daughter's taken an intro psych class at Carleton right now. First psych class she's ever been able to take, because she couldn't take it in high school because of her schedule. And she's loving it. And her professor mostly does research in developmental. And that hit me where I live, because I bet I taught a bunch of apocryphal stuff in my developmental unit in my high school classes that I taught. Because I've heard from developmental psychologists that is one of the most outdated chapters in the intro psych textbooks. So I probably taught a bunch of stuff wrong to generations of high school psych students.
I think, Rob, we all do. I think because we don't teach straight out of the textbook, and we know from the literature that there are errors in intro psych textbooks. I once told Dave Myers this story to his face, and as we both know, he's a kind and gentle soul, and he took it really well. I was 1988, 1989. I was in my last years in graduate school. The first edition of Myers Psychology came out. It was a red cover, solid red cover. Second edition was a solid green cover. I was teaching as a graduate student, Southern Illinois University, Carbondale. We adopt his book. My professor adopted his book. I was one of his graduate teaching assistants. Big adoption for Carbondale, 1,200 students in intro psych every semester. And we adopt the book, and the publisher sends us errata sheets that we have to pass out to students. I've told Dave this story to his face, and they were big stacks that came shrink wrapped. And I remember being in class, handing him, it was a 4-page errata sheet that folded out, one piece of paper, and it was multicolor, so there were color figures that were printed wrong. There were errors in the first edition, as there would be in any major volume that complicated. It's not unusual to have errata printings, especially in the 80s. But sometimes we taught things because we were telling stories that were incorrect. Sometimes we were teaching out of the book, and occasionally the book was wrong. The book just had errors in it. And I told Dave that story once privately, and he took it well. And I said, "Do you have any of those old errata sheets? Do you remember that?" He said, "No, I don't remember that." And he just, as he always is, he was very kind to sit there and listen to me talk about the errors in his book as the world's English language leading textbook, introductory psychology textbook author in the world. Just amazing. Amazing, man.
This is kind of history repeating itself in a different way. They weren't errata sheets, but when AP Psychology, when College Board changed the AP Psychology curriculum, they went from what we call the ACORN book to the CED. So the ACORN book was this old just list of objectives that was just inside a book that happened to have an acorn on the cover, so we all called it an ACORN book. And that's where the ACORN tradition at the reading started. The College Board symbol is an acorn, and everybody had it on their name tag. So a couple, is it 3 years ago now or 4 years ago now? They finally updated the course objectives and they put them into what they called the CED, the course exam description. But in that process, most of that was just a changing of formats. But in that process, they did eliminate a few things and add a few more things to the official AP psychology curriculum. The timing of Dr. Meyer's AP psychology book, because he's got a special edition of his book just for AP students, the timing didn't work out. So the publisher, Worth, ended up sending sheets out to high school teachers, high school AP psychology teachers, and it was just a kindness. It was, here's what got added, here's what got taken away, look at this page in the book, look at this page in the book, and either add this in or take it away according to the College Board, which was super nice. It's also a really unique example of an assessment, a specific assessment, potentially changing the content of what is available to students, because they weren't mistakes. They just didn't happen to get sampled by this. They aren't going to get sampled by this assessment.
Yeah, I think that's a great example of, and I don't know if this is the appropriate term for it, the tail wagging the dog.
Yeah.
It's, the power of that AP Psych exam with 400,000 students a year taking it, driving its own market of intro psych textbooks that are specifically written for that high school market of AP Psych.
So I don't think anyone's done anything wrong, but I always wondered how Dr. Myers felt about that.
I can't speak for Dave, obviously, but he's always been passionate about providing top-notch materials for students his entire career. And I think it's somewhere on an earlier PsychSessions podcast interview with him. I think he's told it in his own words. But for the entire run of his textbook publishing with Worth Publishers, which is now part of Macmillan, for his intro psych textbook, he's never personally collected those royalties. He donates those royalties to different charities that he's in charge. And I hope he won't mind me giving away things that I know he's talked about publicly. He and his wife live off the royalties from his social psychology textbook with McGraw-Hill. So it's not like he changed the book for the intro psych, AP intro psych, and gave away those, again, not errata sheets, but update sheets.
Yeah.
He didn't do it for a profit motive because he's literally not personally profiting from that book. I suppose his charities are profiting from it, but he's not personally profiting from it.
Yeah. And let's just let the love continue, because I think he talked about this with Garth on the PsychSessions, where he and Garth are walking around and looking at spots he remembered from his childhood, from what I remember.
Yeah, I think so Dave's been on twice. And I think that must have been the first one, which is, I want to say like episode 3 or 4, very early in our run, probably late 2017, a very early episode. Right. And someday, if we have Regan Gorung on, we need to, or Sue France on, or both, we need to retell a story about a Psych 1 conference in Pasadena that involved Dave Myers, where we made Dave Myers laugh really hard at a joke that could have gone really wrong.
Ooh,
that's all I'm going to say. I'm going to leave that as a cliffhanger.
Yeah, I'll get off this in a second, but the non-errata sheets, the update sheets, it's a weird example for a bunch of reasons. The one that I haven't mentioned yet is the people who were building the curriculum for College Board. We know a bunch of them. They're a bunch of our friends, and there's some College Board people. None of them would claim to have more authority or expertise than Dr. Myers does. And yet the decisions that they made in some ways drove what students were exposed to who had access to a textbook from Dr. Myers. And that's just a weird situation.
Yeah, it's the tail wagging the dog, which then wagged the tail again.
Yeah, it is.
That affected the fleas. No, that's not a good way to end that, because students aren't fleas. It's, again, another good, I mean, I think we'll call this one the planning episode, because
I think so.
another good topic is how the publishing industry works, because no one goes to grad school and learns about book publishing.
Yeah.
And it is its own entity. It's its own world.
Yeah.
It is bizarre. It has rules that are odd and awkward at times, logical to them because they live in it, but it's a foreign land to many of us until we are admitted to it. And the only way I got into it is on Steve Davis's coattails, being a co-author with him. And then I'm just going to admit my privilege here. It's a bit like a country club. Once you're in, then you get to stay in and you can help others get in.
Yeah.
And I didn't get in without Steve Davis's help from Emporia State at the time.
Yeah. There are K-12 or specifically high school versions of that, where sometimes our high school psychology community can be seen as, and sometimes we're probably pretty guilty of being insular. And the same people get asked for stuff over and over again without new people being asked.
Yes, cliquish, insular is exactly right. But at the same time, either to high school, community college, or college university, you do tend to ask the people who get stuff done, and who tend to be leaders. So I think about our dear friends, Randy Ernst and Charlie Blair Broker, who have a tremendously good intro psych textbook. And why wouldn't you ask them to do that? They have been national leaders in intro psych and AP reading for decades, literally.
Yeah. It will be a good topic. So we'll add that to our episode planning list. That's getting longer and longer. But given what we know about in-group and out-group bias, how do we use that in our world to make sure that we're not falling prey to those social forces to the extent that we can?
And I think the gentle reply is we do fall prey to it. So how do we minimize?
Yeah. That's better. Put it.
How do we minimize that? And how do we, once we recognize it, how do we actively work against it? To STP's credit, the Society for Teaching of Psychology, they have looked in the mirror really with a hard, honest look, I believe in the last 12 months, and published a statement about diversity, equity, and inclusion on their website with some really bold, blunt realizations and some impressive action plans for the future.
Yeah, Susan Nolan wrote at least the intro part of that, didn't she?
She has been very influential, as well as many other folks on the executive committee and others in that sphere of influence.
Their cascade of that. I'm a co-editor on the This Is How I Teach blog with Ginger Wickline. And Ginger and I are going back through, we have a big spreadsheet of people who've been invited to contribute to the blog and people who've contributed. And we added a bunch of columns to that spreadsheet, going back and doing some post hoc analysis of who has contributed and who hasn't, and who were we missing, and how are we going to solicit more submissions. So that's what we're in the process of doing.
And a lot of times when you look for people to volunteer, you go to people who have volunteered for other things before. You look at people who have written for the journal before. And when you do that, you find familiar names, familiar faces, but they may not be minoritized names. They may not be faces from institutions that are Hispanically serving, or they may not be from historically Black institutions. And we just have to make an effort because it's worth making the effort.
Yeah. And this is another example of using what we teach. So a bunch of us taught.
They're very popular. And very important.
We'll call them back. A lot of us taught the weird problem, right? The problem of participants, not great diverse participant pools for a lot of the studies that we talk about. And we try to talk about cross-cultural psychology and cross-cultural replication. And it's really fascinating research. And in some ways, we're taking that idea that we've talked with students about and turning it towards our discipline. Are we participants? We are participants in all this. What is the representation in all the participants of this, so that we can actually get closer to truths about human behavior and thinking.
I think the replication crisis and other events in our recent past tell us that the generalizability and external validity of our studies has much to be desired, generally speaking.